JobPro gives you the ability to track budgets and costs in jobs based on categories. So let's take a look at where you'd set up categories first of all. If we go into Setup and then Lists and Menus, and in here we select Category. So here's some sample categories based on, say, a design company. Now you can apply obviously your own categories to this, whether it's outsourcing of services or categories that you'll link to specific products that you might sell or services also, and you'll set up those in the products module. So once you set up your categories, the next thing that you might want to do is set up any products or services that you sell or purchase. You can put in the products module. So in here you could put in a service, like it could be graphic design per hour or labor per hour, or it could be specific equipment that you may be using as parts, for example, or just general consumable items that you'll incur as costs on jobs. So you'll set any of these areas up with a default category as well. So now let's go into the jobs module and set up a budget job. So we create a new job, specify who the customer is, and then on the budgets tab we'll enter in some budgets here. So for example, we'll put in a budget of development, and that might be 1,000. Another budget might be artwork, 500. And let's pick a budget for photography of 800. You'll notice that there's a default markup entered in on each of these lines. Now you can specify the default markup in setup, and also at the customer level you can put in a default markup as well. So every time you create a job and subsequently budgets for a customer, it'll use their default markup. So this is the overall budget, and the markup is applied to the costs that you incur on this job. Those costs could be from areas like even outsourcing photography, or consumable items that you log as expenses on a job, or there could be line items coming from purchase orders linked to the job, where the category on those line items filters back to the budget screen here and deducts from the budget. So if we just take a look at any of these items here and click on the arrow, we're brought into the full budget screen. In here we can see the relevant areas that will reduce the budget to give you your actual left. Purchase order line items, expenses entered directly on jobs, tasks or time log entries for this category that's linked to the job, and also time logs that are entered linked to a job as well. They can also deduct from a budget. You'll notice that the first two areas come through and have a markup applied to them, but the time logs use the charge out rate and don't actually apply a markup, because technically the charge out rate already has that applied. So these are the areas then that are going to deduct from this budget. So let's take an example of this. So we might, for example, create a purchase order, link it to a supplier, create a line item, and we can pick from a product or a service from the products module. But let's just say we put in that we're going to be outsourcing some photography relating to, I don't know, maybe a brochure that you're doing for a hotel or something. So in here then we can put in a category of photography, and we'll put in a cost price of, we'll put in 300 and a quantity of 1. So now let's go back and look at the job. The quickest way to look at the job is actually to click on the arrow beside the job number here. And we can see the purchase order we've just created. And on the budgets tab, we can see that the actual is coming from the PO and it's applying the markup. So if we now look at that screen, we can see then the purchase order line with the markup applied to it to give us 390. So we've got a budget left for photography of 410. So other areas of the system that you can incur costs on a job include expenses. So directly on the job you can create expenses here, but also you have the same expenses functionality at the task level and time log screen level, where if either tasks or time logs are linked to a job and they've got expenses incurred on them, well, those expenses then will filter back in onto the job screen. And if any of those expenses have a category that's either of these categories that are linked to this job, well, then they'll filter back in and reduce from the budget here as well. So let's just pick, for example, tasks. And we'll create a task from this job. And on the task, we'll put in an expense. Again, we can pick from a consumable item or a service or absolutely anything in here from the products module by clicking on code, or alternatively we can just manually type in a description and put in a cost price and a quantity and a category. So now if we go into the job, which we can do by clicking on the link here, and on the cost tab we can see that expense line that was created from a task. Now this could have been created from a time log as well, or also it could be created from within the jobs module here. And if we now look at the budgets tab, we can see that cost with its markup has been assigned to that dev category to give you your budget left. So let's also log some time against this job and allocate it to artwork. So we can create a time log from here, link it to an individual, put in some details if we want on the comments for the time log, and put in, let's say, 2 hours, and it's defaulted to a rate of 120 an hour because the default for this job is 120. And then what we can do is specify the category for artwork. And then if we take a look at the budgets tab, we can see that those 2 hours have reduced the budget to give you 260 left for the budget for artwork. So that sort of covers all the different areas that will reduce down a budget on a job when we're tracking budgets by category. And we can click here to do a summary budget report. And for that we can base it on the current job or the found set of jobs. So this report is useful maybe if you want to pull up a found set of current jobs done at the moment and you want to track the budgets on those and print off a report. So in this case, let's just do it for the current job. We can put a heading then in on that report, click continue, and then for this job we can see in total the budget and then the 3 different categories of budgets that are going to reduce that budget. And we can see the different areas of costs like purchase orders, expenses, time charges, total costs, and the budget remaining. All these costs being logged against the job, they also filter back into the overall job totals on the right hand side, like your total purchase orders, total expenses, employee time costs. Now that's not the charge out rate, but that's the cost of the employee logging time to your own company and given your total costs. But the budgeting is a separate section and deals at a summary or category level. And this is very useful if you don't need to get into too much detail with reporting or analysis of what is actually reducing the budget, but just to have an overview at a higher level of the budget remaining. So something worth looking at is that, let's say you've created a quotation for a customer. So let's go into quotations. We'll create a new quotation, link it to a customer, and we'll add in a few line items. Now these items could be manually typed in, or we can pick from codes coming from the products file. Okay, just as an example, we'll pick anything here just to give you an idea. And we'll set that to artwork. And we'll set this one to concept as well. And let's put in some cost prices. And quantities. We'd also be putting in sell prices on this as well, but just for the purpose of showing you where you can create a job from a quotation and have the budget information auto-generated on the new job. So let's just finish this out quickly. And so to do that, you click on options, and then you select create job and generate the budget and or assembly details. So in this case, when we click on this button, we're going to be creating the budget details on generation of the job. So we can also set the status of the quotation to approved, yes. So here we are with the new job linked to the customer, and we can see on the budgets tab, it's auto created the two categories, grouping together, in this case, the two concept lines that were on the quote to give you your total budget based on the cost figures, and then artwork based on the cost figures puts in your budget, applies your margin, and then you're ready to go logging costs in relation to that job to deduct your actual and giving you your budget left. So that fairly much covers all the budget related functionality from a category point of view in JobPro. There are other budget related options in relation to logging time and other options as well in the system, but this tutorial is specifically about tracking budgets based on category at the job level.